Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this fascinating exploration of why modern stress feels so deeply inescapable these days, and much more importantly, how we can actually break free. Listen, if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by life, even when everything on paper looks absolutely fine, and yet you're just exhausted from doing something as simple as checking your email, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're unpacking a groundbreaking framework called Metaphysical Psychology, developed by Professor T. It is a totally new way of understanding the hidden architecture of human suffering, and we are going to map the whole thing out together.
So, why does stopping feel impossible, even when our lives are seemingly fine? As modern adults, a lot of us experience what Professor T calls ontological saturation, which is a fancy way of describing that ambient, invisible pressure you feel to constantly optimize every single second of your day. It makes us feel trapped, right? Yet we can't quite point to the cage. We just know that the very thought of stopping brings on this massive wave of dread. So, what exactly is holding us hostage here? Well, the key to unlocking that cage is this core concept, metaphysical literacy. It's defined as the ability to recognize and relate skillfully to the implicit frameworks through which we interpret reality. Think of it like a specialized pair of glasses. See, most of the time, we don't consciously choose the frameworks that dictate what counts as success or what kind of person we're supposed to be. We just kind of inhabit them blindly. Metaphysical literacy gives a name to the solution. It's this absolutely crucial skill that allows us to finally see the difference between reality itself and the intense interpretive frameworks we accidentally overlay right on top of it. All right, moving into Section 1, the modern stress paradox and navigating ontological saturation. To really get why we need this new lens, we first need to look at our environment. Modern society literally immerses us in these incredibly powerful meaning systems that operate totally below our conscious awareness. We're talking productivity metrics, optimization culture, algorithmic feedback. It's like the phantom ghost of your LinkedIn feed, whispering that you're constantly falling behind. In the past, pressure usually came from explicit, visible authorities, like a boss, a religion, or a strict social hierarchy. But today, the pressure is internalized. It is just ambient. It's everywhere and nowhere all at once. We are swimming in this sea of social evaluation loops and comparison systems, absorbing the idea that we must constantly optimize our lives. Honestly, it's no wonder we feel exhausted. We're running on a treadmill powered by invisible frameworks. Which brings us to Section 2, Bridging the Great Divide, Reconnecting Mind and Meaning. Historically, we've had this massive blind spot that's held us back from treating this ambient stress. We've basically had two separate universes. On one side, you have psychology, which brilliantly focuses on treating the mind, understanding emotions, cognitive distortions, and trauma. And on the other side, philosophy, which focuses on existence, meaning, and our relationship with the world. But keeping them as isolated islands completely prevents us from understanding our true suffering. Psychology might ask, how do you feel? While philosophy asks, what is the nature of existence? But neither one alone asks the most important question. How is your deeply held philosophy about existence secretly causing your psychological pain? And that's exactly where Professor T's modern synthesis comes in. To quote the source, metaphysical psychology bridges the psychological and metaphysical domains to understand the entire structure of human experience. It's the necessary bridge to finally connect these two separate universes. And to be clear, it doesn't replace traditional therapy or philosophy, it connects them. It recognizes that if your deep worldview is fundamentally misaligned, while all the cognitive reframing in the world just isn't going to stick, because the structural foundation of the house is cracked. Let's dig into Section 3, the anatomy of suffering, the mechanics of the trap. Okay, let's look at what is actually happening inside us when we hurt. The crucial point here is differentiating unavoidable pain from chronic suffering. Pain is just the inevitable friction between our natural desires and reality. It hurts when you lose a job or a relationship. That's just life. But suffering, that is avoidable. Suffering is a structural misalignment. It happens when our inner worldview fundamentally clashes with reality. Or, even deeper, when two of our own inner postures violently collide with each other. Just as a misaligned spine causes chronic physical pain, a misaligned worldview causes chronic psychological distress. Without even realizing it, we are accidentally generating this suffering ourselves through our evaluative frameworks. To really map this out, metaphysical psychology gives us what's called the evaluative architecture. It is a 9-layer spectrum of human experience. It goes all the way from your raw physiological nervous system, your basic fight-or-flight polyvagal states, up through your perceptions, your emotions, your behaviors, all the way to your existential worldview and transcendent meaning. And all of these layers are happening at once. They are deeply, deeply interconnected.
When a core belief at the existential level demands perfection, it literally sends a shockwave down the structure, causing your physiological layer to flood with panic. You can't just treat the panic down at the bottom. You have to look at the whole building. So where does the misalignment actually happen? Well, it happens in how we evaluate our desires. Take what Professor T calls the on-tick mode. It's this healthy, open posture. It sounds like, I want to succeed, but failure is possible and I will manage. It acknowledges reality. It simply wants something. There's room to breathe there, you know?
But then, under pressure, we undergo what Professor T calls the fatal existential leap. Our healthy preference violently shifts into an absolute, rigid demand. Suddenly the thought becomes, I must succeed, failure is absolutely unforgivable and cannot happen. The rigidity of that statement completely changes the game. This isn't just ambition anymore, this is a prison. This rigid demand completely collapses any alternatives you might have had. When your mind says failure cannot happen, but reality says failure is always possible, you are structurally guaranteed to suffer. Now for Section 4, Metaphysical Literacy in Action, seeing the framework. Now that we see the trap, this intense shift from a simple want to a rigid must, how do we actually use metaphysical literacy to dismantle it? First, we really need to bust some common myths to clearly state what this is not. Metaphysical literacy is not positive thinking. It's not denying reality or forcing some blind optimism on yourself. And it is certainly not about blaming yourself for being stressed. This isn't just about thinking happy thoughts or repressing your feelings. It is a structural realization. It's recognizing that your intense pressure actually makes absolute sense within the specific framework you're currently inhabiting, but then realizing that the framework itself is not absolute reality. The true magic of this skill comes down to one simple phrase: distance without disengagement. Metaphysical literacy acts as a sort of cognitive existential shock absorber. It allows you to step back from your interpretive frameworks just enough to see them. You don't stop caring, you remain fully engaged with your work, your family, your goals, but you stop absolutizing the outcomes. You introduce a healthy distance between your identity and your performance. You still care deeply, but you are no longer crushed by the weight of a rigid must. Finally, Section 5. 3 steps to liberation, reversing the chain reaction. Okay, let's bring this all together with a practical map. Professor T outlines a clear 3-stage path back to freedom, to break out of this invisible prison. Step 1 is awareness. You have to actually visualize the deep structures causing your pain. You have to spot the invisible framework and catch yourself right in the middle of an existential leap. Step 2 is deconstruction. This is where you untie the knot. You release those restrictive musts and the absolute demands binding you. You challenge the narrative. And step 3 is realignment. You rebuild your values toward their natural, open direction. You return from absolute demands back to natural wants. And I really want to emphasize this point because it's absolutely crucial. Realignment is not forcing change. It is returning to your natural state. This isn't about powering through your stress with sheer willpower or trying to forcefully rewrite your entire personality. It is structurally restoring your inner harmony. It's allowing your desires to uncoil from their rigid, defensive posture and just breathe again. It is a profoundly relieving process. I love this quote from the source material. Must is the shadow of want. Think about that. It's such a profound insight. Our rigid demands, our panics, our obsessive needs to succeed, they aren't evil. They are just obscured, misaligned, and frightened versions of our truest desires. The must is just a shadow. If you can trace the shadow back to its source, you'll find a perfectly healthy, vibrant want, just waiting to be reclaimed. Which leaves us with this final, powerful question. Are you living by your natural wants, or are you imprisoned by your invisible musts? Take a moment today to examine the frameworks you inhabit. Pay attention to that subtle shift between your open preferences and your rigid demands. By developing your metaphysical literacy, you can dismantle that invisible prison, realign your evaluative architecture, and step back into a place of genuine, lasting freedom. So I leave you with this. What rigid musts are hiding in your shadows today? If you want to dive deeper into dismantling them, the full source material is waiting for you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.